Let's talk about the myth of creative genius. We're going to dissect this idea that brilliant work just springs from innate talent. Because the truth is, the real engine behind originality is something else entirely. It's a system, one built on volume and relentless iteration. Most original ideas fail before anyone ever sees them. Now, just let that sink in for a second. This isn't just a pessimistic take, it's a signal. It's pointing to some kind of hidden system at play, a system that decides which ideas get to live and which ones just disappear. So that line, that's our starting point. It forces us to ask a really important question. Why is it that a handful of creators seem to operate at this genius level, constantly shipping groundbreaking work, while so many other smart, talented people don't? Well, the easy answer, the one we all kind of default to, is talent. Some people just have it. But the evidence, when you really look at it, points somewhere else. The real answer isn't a magical gift. It's a hidden system. An observable process that, when you follow it, consistently produces incredible results. And what's so fascinating is that this pattern, this hidden engine, it shows up everywhere. We see the exact same dynamic in tech startups, in scientific research, in art studios, in writing. It doesn't matter what the field is. The same invisible force is at work. So to really get our heads around this engine, we need to decode its three main signals. First, there's this idea of unseen accumulation. Second is understanding how volume itself is the engine. And third, we'll look at how iteration is what actually creates what we call brilliance. Okay, signal one, unseen accumulation. Think about it. We only ever see the final polished product, right? The successful book, the hit app, the masterpiece painting. What we don't see are the hundreds of failed drafts, the dead-end prototypes, the discarded canvases. All of that invisible work just vanishes from the story. And because of that, we mistake the final result for some kind of innate ability. We call it genius, when really it's just the tip of a massive iceberg of work that we never get to see. Now, the second signal really builds on that. Volume is the engine. We have this idea that quality comes first, that you need a great idea to even start. But the system works the other way around. Quality is a statistical outcome of quantity. The more variations you produce, the higher the mathematical probability that one of them will actually be good enough to survive contact with reality. And this chart really lays it out. You might need to generate 100 attempts, 100 different stabs at the problem, just to get 10 that are even viable. And out of those 10, after they get beat up by feedback and real-world constraints, maybe one survives. That's the one we call a genius idea. And that brings us to the third signal. Brilliance isn't the cause, it's the effect. It's created through iteration. No idea shows up fully formed and perfect. It gets sharp, it gets elegant, it becomes inspired only after it's been refined again and again and again. We remember that brilliant final version, but we conveniently forget all the clumsy, broken early versions that had to exist for the final one to be born. Brilliance is really just the last frame in a very long, very messy editing process. So, if that's the engine, how does it actually perform out in the wild? Well, this is what we call the game. It's where we see that quality isn't where you start, it's the outcome. It's what's left standing at the end of a very competitive process. Let's just put these two mindsets side by side, because the difference is everything. The genius myth has you obsessed with finding the one perfect idea. You're waiting for a lightning bolt of inspiration, and when you fail, you think it's a sign that you just don't have what it takes. That leads to a paralysis. The creative system, on the other hand, is focused on a high rate of output. The process is simple: generate, then filter. And failure? It's not a verdict. It's just data for the next version. That leads to production. And that's the fundamental rule of the game. This system, the real world, is the ultimate editor. It does not care how brilliant your idea seems in your head. It only selects for the ideas that can actually survive contact with reality, with budgets, with audiences, with physics. So you have to ask, what happens when you get this wrong? What's the cost of misunderstanding this system and clinging to the myth of genius? Well, the cost is actually pretty severe. So who loses? Talented creators lose. They stall out, waiting for that perfect idea that's never going to arrive. We all lose, because smart ideas that could have made a difference never ship. Original work gets watered down or ignored because it wasn't tested early and often. And maybe worst of all, individual creators lose, because they fall into the trap of mistaking thinking about the work for the actual work of making something. So it all comes down to this. Ideas don't fail because they're bad.
They fail because the people making them fundamentally misunderstand the system that is ultimately going to judge them.
So if that's the losing strategy, what's the alternative? What's the edge that the most effective creators have? It's not a better set of habits. It's not more motivation. It's a completely different mental orientation. It all comes down to thinking in volume. High-output creators just think differently. First, they don't see constraints like a tight deadline or a small budget as a problem. They see them as clarifying forces that make the work better. Second, they test and kill their own ideas without mercy. There's no ego involved. If it doesn't work, it's gone. Third, they actually design environments for themselves that force high output because they know you can't rely on willpower alone. And finally, they are obsessed with their process because they know if the process is right, good outcomes are inevitable.
So really, their success is not evidence of some kind of superior, God-given talent. It's evidence of a superior process, a better engine for generating tons of ideas, and then selecting the few that can actually survive.
Now, looking at things this way isn't just an interesting theory. It's a diagnostic tool, and it leaves us with some pretty direct questions we have to ask about our own work.
First, what are you actually practicing? Are you practicing the messy, difficult act of shipping work, or are you just practicing the much safer art of thinking about it?
Second, how many ideas have you made? Not how many have you had in the shower, not how many are in your notebook. How many have you actually built, produced, and released into the world? And finally, maybe the most important question of all, what version are you on? Because if the answer is still version 1, you're probably not building an engine. You're waiting for genius.